Hello, welcome to Podfic Galore. I'm your horrible online reader, Grossgeister. I read out loud fanfictions for you busy bees, free of charge and no strings attached. Today I will continue reading the Silmarillion/Lord of the Rings fic by Bloodwing Blackbird from Archive of Our Own, called And Now Each Night I Count the Stars. I hope you can at least try to enjoy my voice, and I will try my best for you with the equipment available to me. Note, this fic is rated explicit. On with the show.
And now each night I count the stars. Chapter 7. Tell me of her family, Makler said to Halbarad. They had reached the old watchtower of Amon Sul earlier that day and made camp in a sheltered place beneath the hill. Halbarad was hoping to meet with Aragorn, but it seemed that they had beaten him there. Makler was building the fire, twisting together handfuls of dried grass. Halbarad had trapped a rabbit which he was dressing for their meal. He looked up from his task, hands still busy, and he paused at the question, uncertainly plain on his face. My family? He asked, as if unsure that he had heard Makler properly, as if surprised to be asked. Why? Perhaps I wish to know. Halbarad frowned, thoughtful as ever. Makler liked to see him this way, his broad and crooked nose baked red by the sun, his brow furrowed. Makler knew that he would soon smile, for he did so often. He was proven right, as Halbarad did smile then behind his ruddy beard, and he shook his head. There is not much to tell. I do not come from the line of kings, like some I could mention. The teasing tone in his voice was a new thing, and Makler was surprised to find that it pleased him. So I shall hear about a life different than my own. That sounds much more interesting. Indulge me, please. My, but you're polite this evening, Halbarad chuckled as he tucked the last of the pelt free. Makler sniffed at that. He could be polite when it pleased him, but he thought Halbarad might prefer him honest. He blew onto the kindling, watching the memories dance in the sparks. It seemed that they crowded close these days. Halbarad was watching him again. Go on, then. Well, my father taught me this. Halbarad gestured at the rabbit. Trapping, woodcraft, much of what I know, he said, cleaning his knife on a handful of grass. Tell me what he was like. It was a challenge, Makler knew, to sum up a life in this way. What could he say about his own father? He could say all the expected things, that he was proud, demanding, that he had had more time for his work than for his sons, that he had had too many sons, that he wanted Makler to be someone else, someone graceful and wise, and that his disappointment had made him cruel. Would he also say that there was a small, sad part of himself that still wanted to make him proud? It was kind, Halbarad said. And what a strange idea it was. We lost my mother when I was still young. There was a fever, and she died along with my sister. She was younger than I was, and never strong. I was sick as well, but I lived. And when the fever broke, they were both already gone, already buried. I remember her, though, the way she held me on her lap and sang to me, stories to help me sleep, to soothe me when I cried. Halbarad was pensive, his voice quiet. I still remember how my father wept, and how he held me close up to that. He taught me a lot, and I think that he wanted me to know that the world would be hard, but he was never harsh with me. Now that he had begun to speak, he seemed to find it easier to go on. I think he wanted me to know that home, such as it was, could be a soft place, even when the world was not. He looked at Makler then, and maybe he could see the old hunger after all, that he was wise enough not to say so, also wise enough not to stop, or maybe it was just that his own memories had him in their grip. He went on, though, and told stories of his youth, and of the things that his father taught him. He told the story of the time his father had been chopping wood and had got into the hornet's nest, and how the creatures had chased them both until they had jumped into the river to escape. Makler laughed with him, at once warmed and filled with a strange sense of loss for a man he had never known, but also for himself, who could not imagine what having such a father would have been like. Halbarad sounded distant when he finally finished. I lost him, it must be 10 years ago now. I'm sorry, Makro said. Halbarad looked up. He smiled false for once. In truth, I lost him long before that. In his last years he was not well. There were many times that he didn't know me, and he called me more often by his brother's name. I miss him, but it is easier, now, to remember him as he was before his illness. He placed the butchered rabbit into the pot. Makro watched as he cleaned his hand, then shifted so Halbarad could sit beside him. Now, what of you? I know nothing of your kin, but what the tales tell. I do not forget a lesson, so I'll not ask about your father, but would you tell me about your brothers? There are too many of them. You must choose one. I think I will learn more if I ask for your choice. And so Makro spoke of his brother Madras the Tall, and the way that he had been as sharp and joyful as a blade, the way he could quell the fiercest of arguments and turn enemies into allies. Makro spoke of the vast gentleness and of the sadness that made Madras foolhardy. He would not hide from the evils that they had done, not even to spare that beloved memory, but neither could he hide the love he had borne for his brother. There were things that he could not bring himself to speak of, not yet, for he was still ashamed. How could he explain how he loved his brother? That he would have followed his brother anywhere and done anything for him, even as he betrayed him, even as he burned with envy. That he loved Madras and missed him, but also hated him because he had not protected Maklar from doing the things that they had done. I have spoken too long, he finally said when it became too much. Let's eat. Halbarad was merciful and said no more. The next day Aragorn arrived, the wizard Gandalf with him. Halbarad had gone to the top of the hill to keep watch on the road, while Maklar stayed near the camp in case they approached from the north. A flock of starlings lifted from one of the nearby fields, and Maklar paused in his mending, puffing at the pipe that he had held between his teeth as he worked, and watched the shapes they made in the air. Fall would come soon. Maklar did not need to see Halbarad to know his step on the path behind him. They'll be here shortly, he said, past the patched cloak to Halbarad. Did you see them? Ah, the birds, of course. He took the cloak and held it up. Thank you. This is much neater than I had have done. To my father's great disappointment, I was never a weaver. This I can do, though. Halbarad gave him a sharp look, but Maklar had nothing more to say. Young Halbarad, I see you've taught our friend to smoke. Halbarad slung his cloak over his shoulder and went to greet the old wizard. We didn't expect to find you here. What brings you? The same as always. I go hither and thither, poking my nose into things. You know how it is. His bright eyes, pale blue and sharp as gemstones, flicked to Maklar, who had come to stand behind Halbarad. Well met again, son of Fëanor. Our last meeting was not how I had hoped to be reunited with an old friend. Maklar nodded. I hear the elves call you Mithrandir. It suits me, you know. It does now. Your eyes are still the same. Aragorn looked between the two, then stirred himself. I see we have no need for introductions. Let us then sit, for we have much to discuss. He brushed off a stone and pulled his own pipe from his breast pocket. Have you saved any weed for us, Maklar? Maklar found a seat for himself and tossed the pouch over to Aragorn. Halbarad settled himself on the ground nearby. Well, Maklar, I'm glad to see that you're again traveling together, Aragorn continued. I think that my kinsman missed your company. Halbarad plucked at a tuft of grass and threw it at Aragorn. He lies, he said. Then he leaned his shoulder against Maklar's knee, as if to reassure him. Maklar thought he would keep him so close forever if he could. Aragorn laughed. As I said, I have spoken to Elrond of this, and he agrees, as does Gandalf. We're willing to include you in our concerns, but there is something I would know first. Maklar waited. Gandalf tells me that our meeting in Bree was no accident. Is this true? Halbarad glanced over his shoulder, as if he too wanted an answer to this question. It is. Why? Asked Halbarad. That is a harder question. It wasn't a decision born of great contemplation. I found myself in the north, and there were foul things stirring, But I saw that there were those who contested them in whatever small way they could. Maybe I've had enough of bright hosts and great armies. But if Beren and Luthien could triumph where the hosts of Noldor failed, then perhaps I should throw in my lot with their descendants. He looked at Halbardan, seated before him, and thought that there was perhaps a more honest way to tell it. That is what I would say were this a song. The truth is that I saw you and your kin, and you seemed to me honorable and merciful, and I thought perhaps I could be among you, even if I could not be among my own people. Perhaps I could be taken as, what did your friend say, astray? Astray? Aragorn asked. It was Almedon, Halbarad offered, as if it explained everything. Perhaps it did, for Aragorn laughed again. Very well, then we'll take you in, son of Fëanor. Indeed, I think it's too late to do otherwise. Gandalf nodded. True, Halbarad has adopted him already. Halbarad said nothing, but his ears had gone quite red. Will you tell me why the Dunedain keep watch on the land of the halflings? You have met my friend Bilbo, have you not? Asked Gandalf. I have. He told me of his adventures. And you also know the wars of the Second Age, and of the Rings of Power, said Gandalf. I'll not speak of it more plainly, but I think I need say no more for you to make a guess of why I've asked the Dunedain to watch the Shire. I think it's sufficient to say that I fear that Bilbo brought back a greater treasure than he knows. He lowered his brows ominously. Much of what I know is mere suspicion. But if I suspect it, then so shall Sauron, and soon. Aragorn spoke. Halbarad, Gandalf and I have heard rumor of the creature, this time in the south. I will journey that way tomorrow to continue the hunt. The Shire, I entrust to you for a time. I will send a word as I may. For my part, said Gandalf, I go visit an old friend in the Shire. Listen well for any who seem to be seeking something there. Especially listen for the name of Baggins. You may leave messages for me here, or in the inn at Bree, or with the guard at Sarenford. He smiled and his mustaches bristled. Do not neglect the main road and those who travel on it. I know your rangers are fond of your heaths and ditches, but if you can stand to sleep indoors on occasion, you will be more likely to hear of any who are asking questions. That night, Muckle watched as the others slept. The night was loud with late summer sounds of insects and night birds, and the stars were bright. He stood, turning over verses in his mind, a song about a bull dancing in a sunlit field. His eyes strayed, as they too often did, toward Halbarad, to watch the steady rise and fall of his breath, to try to match his own to it, to borrow some of his calm. But he was not the only one wakeful. Once I called you beloved, Gandalf said. It has been long ages since then, and they not lie lightly on either of us. What shall I call you now? Muckler went and sat beside him, knees pulled up to his chest, his arms wrapped around them. Call me old friend. Those bright eyes searched Muckler's face. And what does he call you? Is there nothing hidden? Not from one who has loved you. You stand close behind Halbarad, and he sits near to you. You are like two who share a secret. He calls me Blackbird. Does he know? You wizards don't like to speak plainly, do you? It is something we have in common with elves. Does he know you love him? We have not spoken of it. That does not mean that he does not know. I cannot tell him. Because you're afraid. You have seen the pain that comes of loving a mortal. No, because he should not love me. How sad the world would be if only the sinless could be loved. Even if you never name it, you will lose him, far too soon for your liking. Even if he lives as long as the Númenóreans of old, he will not live forever, and you will lose him. He rolled over. So weigh well the cost of waiting. He tucked his cloak up to the tip of his nose. But then, I'm often told that I'm an interfering old busybody, but I would not have to interfere if only the rest of the world were wiser. Makler opened his mouth, perhaps to protest. Gandalf snorted, muffled in his cloak. Quiet now, let an old man sleep. Makler stared long at the stars after that. Halbarad, who had lain still, feigning sleep, was troubled and lay awake for a long time. Blackbird, said Halbarad one evening, why do you not sing? Autumn had set in, the air crisp and cool. The morning's fog had cleared to a bright day that smelled of wood smoke. On Gandalf's advice, they had visited the Prancing Pony, where Makler had earned more ale than he could drink and had contrived to pass the excess to Halbarad, even though they were pretending not to be acquainted. Apparently, it had been enough to leave Halbarad feeling reckless. They slept in a hayloft of the Prancing Pony that night. Butterbur had been thrilled to see Makler that evening, for it ensured a full common room, but his gratitude had not materialized an empty chamber. Nob, though, had taken them aside and said that they could sleep in the hayloft for just a few pennies. Halbarad had been a trifle disappointed, but Makler had flung wide the shutters, letting through the starlight. Halbarad hadn't noticed it before, the way that Makler seemed ill at ease indoors, but this was perhaps the first time that he had seen so clearly the relief of leaving a crowd behind. The first time he had noticed the difference between the peaceful way that Makler played for himself, for Halbarad, and the way that he performed before a group. It seemed that he needed it sometimes, that the songs were meant to be sung, to be shared, but that there was a price for it. Makler turned back to him, his head ringed about with stars. The tales say you are a mighty singer. Oh, the tales say many things about me, I'm sure. They say you were second only to Daran of Doriath. Halbarad cast himself onto the sweet-smelling hay and looked up at Makler. Tall and mysterious he seemed, with his eyes bright as starlight. He no longer hid his face as he had done when they first met, and sometimes it was so easy to only see Blackbird, his friend, and to forget that he was ancient and accursed. Sometimes, though, Halbarad looked and saw that the two were one and the same, and thought what an odd privilege it was that he should be unafraid to nettle him so. Do they? You know that they do. You could prove them wrong, I'd wager. And you shall judge? I had no idea you were such an expert in the field of insipid songs about flowers. Some of us are fond of flowers, said Halbarad. I'll say whatever you like if you'll sing for me. Very well, my foolish bull. I'll indulge this fancy of yours. Then Makler sat beside him and began to sing a song that was familiar as his father's voice, and strange as the tongue of the stars. He could follow the words, the ancient tongue that Makler spoke in his own strange way. Then he thought he could understand the song even without the words, for it was hard to say what the song was about, for it seemed to be about everything. A song about making of the world, of the ending of the world, of things bright, things dark, the blood of a birth, and the silence of death. His voice was the cry of the eagle and the last scream of a rabbit, like the howl of the wind, like a flame. When he was finished, Makler spoke into the waiting silence. What would you have of me, Halbarad? I have not much to give. Halbarad turned and laid his hand upon Makler's knee, leaning close that he could watch his face. I would be yours. At that, Makler closed his eyes, and Halbarad was afraid that he would turn away from him, that he had misunderstood what he had overheard. They were still for a moment, and then Makler reached back, brushing his knuckles cool against Halbarad's cheek, opening his hand to caress his jaw, to thread through his beard. Halbarad turned into the touch, lips against the leather of the half-glove, and he could hear Makler's breath catching his throat. You can look, said Makler. Halbarad took the hand between his own and tugged off the glove. The long fingers twitched, the impulse to make a fist, to hide his palms. But Makler opened his hands and let Halbarad see the marks left by the jewels, a slick scarring of the skin, rippled like water that had been stirred, gnarled like a wound on a tree trunk. There were other marks too, the more everyday sort of wounds, roughness of a hand accustomed to a harp and spear. Halvard looked, as if these hands, the fine bones, the bird's pulse of the wrist, held the key to every secret. He laid his lips to the scars, then to the heartbeat, and then pressed those hands tight to his breast before he found the courage to look into Makla's face. His eyes shone, and Halvard thought for a moment that he must have made a terrible error. I don't think that I can be what you desire. I ask you to be nothing but what you are. You do not know what that is, Makler said. I do not care. Maybe it is not wise for either of us. Is this your idea of courtship? Makler's lips twisted into a half-smile. I begin to understand why you usually travel alone. Halvard began to protest, although whatever argument he might have made was lost, for Makler leaned close then, lips against his, chapped but soft, and if Halvard had not been lost before, then he was now, living only for the shared breaths that still tasted of song, for the clever hands that clung tightly to him, for the teeth that bit sharp in his neck, for the teeth that bit sharp at his neck, for the voice that whispered sudden, sharp, and frightened in his ear, even as he gasped the words. Don't. Please. Let it be enough that we're fools together. Halvard drew back to look at Makler. I said I would not ask you to be something other than you are. Makler looked aside, his lips twisting against some desperate feeling. Then understand this, please. Halvard didn't understand, but it made no difference in the end. I'll not say it, not if it hurts you to hear it. But you should know that it changes nothing of what I feel. You are that stubborn. Please, let us say steadfast, Halvard smiled. It sounds nicer. Makler shook his head. I like you stubborn. As long as you like me. I like you far more than is wise. Is that enough? Makler had come close again, breathing the words hot against Halvard's neck as his fingers found their way beneath Halvard's tunic. Halvard could feel the smile against his skin as he gasped. It is enough. End of chapter 7. Stay tuned.